The discovery of LSD, a happy lab accident. Let's set the scene. The year is 1938. Europe's on edge. Tensions are rising. But in the quiet Swiss city of Basel, inside the pristine walls of Sandoz laboratories, a man in a white coat is working away, completely unaware that he's about to change how humanity sees reality. Literally. That man, Dr. Albert Hofmann. A disciplined, detail-oriented chemist, Hofmann was deep into studying ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. Now, ergot isn't your average mold. In fact, it's kind of infamous. For centuries, it had been responsible for bizarre outbreaks of mass hysteria. People would eat bread infected with ergot and suddenly believe their limbs were burning, or they'd start dancing uncontrollably in the streets. Medieval Europe even gave it a spooky name, St. Anthony's Fire. So why mess with it? Well, Hofmann wasn't interested in triggering visions of hellfire and medieval mayhem. He was trying to extract medicinal compounds from ergot that could help with things like blood circulation and childbirth. This was serious pharmaceutical work. No trippy intentions whatsoever. During this process, Hofmann created a compound he labeled LSD-25, short for lysergic acid diethylamide, the 25th molecule in a long series of ergot derivatives he had been experimenting with. He tested it on lab animals. Nothing major happened. No breakthrough, no drama. So he set it aside and moved on. End of story, right? Well, not quite. Fast forward to 1943. Hofmann, still haunted by some strange intuition, decided to revisit LSD-25. This time, while handling the substance, something unexpected happened. He accidentally absorbed a tiny amount through his fingertips. Suddenly, the world shifted. He experienced strange sensations, dreamlike visions, and a powerful, altered state of consciousness. But it wasn't terrifying. It was mesmerizing. Something about LSD had unlocked a doorway into a realm of perception he'd never known existed. A few days later, Hofmann decided to take a more intentional dose. That day, April 19th, 1943, he hopped on his bicycle and pedaled home through the streets of Basel while the effects kicked in. What followed became the first recorded acid trip in history. Buildings warped, colors intensified. Time stretched like chewing gum, and Albert Hofmann, our mild-mannered chemist, became a pioneer of the psychedelic age. This day is now celebrated every year by psychonauts and researchers alike as Bicycle Day. Hofmann immediately realized this was more than just a weird side effect. LSD was a key to the mind, a tool for exploring consciousness itself. But what could it be used for? Could it heal? Could it enlighten? Could it drive people insane? Those questions would fuel decades of exploration, and more than a few controversies. But it all began here. One curious scientist, one moldy fungus, and one very memorable bike ride. Hofmann's first trip. Bicycle Day begins. It's April 19th, 1943. A seemingly ordinary Monday in Basel, Switzerland. But inside a quiet chemistry lab, something extraordinary is unfolding. After his strange experience a few days earlier, Dr. Albert Hofmann had a strong hunch that LSD-25 might be far more powerful than he'd initially realized. Determined to understand its effects, he did what most scientists would never dream of. He decided to test it on himself. Carefully, he measured out what he believed to be a minuscule dose. 250 micrograms. Now, here's where things get interesting. Hofmann assumed this was a safe, conservative amount, but LSD is astonishingly potent. That 250 microgram dose, it turns out it was more than enough to launch a person into orbit. Within an hour, the effects began to kick in. At first, it was subtle. Dizziness, a sense of unease, colors sharpening, sounds growing stranger. But soon, Hofmann's entire perception of reality began to shift. Objects moved. His sense of time fractured. the ordinary transformed into the surreal. Realizing things were escalating fast, Hofmann asked his lab assistant to escort him home. But it was wartime Europe. No cars, no taxis, just one reliable option: a bicycle. And so Hofmann mounted his bike and pedaled through the streets of Basel, embarking on what would become the most legendary bike ride in psychedelic history. As he rode, the world around him began to twist and morph. Houses stretched and swayed. Trees shimmered. Every second felt stretched, as if time itself had been turned inside out. By the time he reached home, reality was barely hanging on by a thread. He lay down, overwhelmed by vivid hallucinations. At one point, he feared he was going insane. He thought he was dying. He believed his neighbor was a witch and that the furniture in his house was alive. His sense of identity, time, and space melted into something completely foreign. But then something shifted. The intensity faded, and what followed was a deep sense of clarity, wonder, and inner peace. By the next morning, Hofmann felt surprisingly refreshed. His body was fine, his mind was calm, and most importantly, he knew something incredible had just happened. He later described the experience as a journey into the unknown, a kind of waking dream filled with light, emotion, and insight. For Hofmann, this wasn't about escape. It was about discovery. LSD had opened a door to a realm of consciousness few had ever glimpsed. That day, April 19th, would go down in history as Bicycle Day, the first intentional acid trip and the birth of the modern psychedelic era. And while Hofmann could never have predicted it, the strange little substance he rediscovered would soon leap from the lab into the world, inspiring a generation to question everything. In the next part, we'll explore how LSD went from test tube to counterculture, lighting up the 1960s with color, music, rebellion, and a whole lot of mind expansion. LSD and the 1960s counterculture. By the late 1950s, LSD was no longer just a quirky chemical known only to Swiss scientists. Word had gotten out, and researchers around the world began experimenting with this mysterious mind-altering compound. Doctors, psychologists, and even the CIA got involved, each hoping to unlock its potential, or at least understand what on earth it was doing to people's brains. But while the scientists were trying to figure LSD out, something very different was happening in American culture. The 1960s arrived like a thunderclap. Civil rights protests, the Vietnam War, women's liberation, environmental activism. It was an era bursting with rebellion, idealism, and a deep hunger for change. Into this storm stepped Timothy Leary, a Harvard psychologist who would become one of the most controversial figures of the era. Leary wasn't interested in keeping LSD confined to the lab. He believed this drug could transform society. His mantra: turn on, tune in, drop out. In other words, open your mind, connect with the universe, and ditch the system. Leary's message hit a nerve. Disillusioned with war, authority, and conformity, young people were already questioning the world around them. LSD didn't just fuel that questioning, it supercharged it. Suddenly, users weren't just listening to music. They were feeling it in their bones. They weren't just looking at art. They were being absorbed by it. They weren't just thinking about peace. They were envisioning entire new ways of living. Psychedelic culture exploded. Music became the primary vehicle for this transformation. Bands like the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, and Jimi Hendrix started experimenting with sound in bold new ways, directly inspired by LSD trips. Albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band weren't just records, they were journeys. Whole experiences designed to bend your brain. The art world followed suit. Swirling colors, melting shapes, and cosmic themes flooded posters, murals, and clothing. Fashion got wild, hair got longer, rules got looser. Suddenly, normal was boring, and psychedelic was in. At the heart of it all was a growing belief that LSD wasn't just a drug. It was a gateway, a way to challenge rigid thinking, to rediscover spirituality, to reject consumerism and war. People were turning away from mainstream society and toward communes, mysticism, and personal freedom. But of course it wasn't all peace signs and flower crowns. As more people used LSD recreationally and sometimes recklessly, panic began to spread. Horror stories emerged. Some were exaggerated, others were very real. And by the late 1960s, the backlash was underway. Still, the impact was undeniable. LSD had shaken the foundations of culture, art, politics, and even religion. It helped give rise to the modern environmental movement, Eastern spirituality in the West, and a new wave of self-exploration that continues today. From college campuses to music festivals, LSD helped an entire generation look at the world, and themselves, in a brand new way. Up next, the psychedelic backlash, the war on drugs, and how LSD went from mind-expanding miracle to Schedule I villain. LSD, the Crackdown, and the rise of the war on drugs. So by the late 1960s, LSD had gone from secret lab experiment to cultural wildfire, lighting up music, art, and the minds of millions. But as the saying goes, what goes up usually crashes spectacularly. The psychedelic revolution was causing waves, and not everyone was thrilled. Governments, law enforcement, and mainstream society started to freak out. The headlines were full of stories about bad trips, freakouts, and even some tragic accidents. Suddenly, LSD wasn't just a mind-expanding tool. It was being painted as a dangerous menace, a gateway drug, and a threat to the very fabric of society. In 1966, the United States made LSD illegal. Other countries quickly followed. The war on drugs kicked into high gear, and suddenly LSD was lumped in with heroin and cocaine, the bad stuff. Possession, manufacture, or distribution became criminal offenses with serious consequences. This crackdown had huge consequences, not just for users, but for science itself. Research that had been promising and exciting ground to a halt. Universities, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies were forced to shut down their LSD studies, sometimes literally overnight. The drug Hofmann discovered was pushed underground, becoming associated more with hippies and rebels than serious science or medicine. For decades, LSD remained taboo, locked away behind stigma and fear. Popular culture reflected this too, with films and TV shows often portraying LSD users as crazed, out-of-control lunatics. The nuance was lost. But here's the twist. While the war on drugs was intended to clean up society, it arguably created new problems. The criminalization of LSD disproportionately affected certain communities, increased incarceration rates, and stalled promising therapeutic research. Fast forward to recent years, and we're seeing a dramatic change. A new wave of scientific interest has revived LSD and other psychedelics as potential treatments for mental health conditions like depression, PTSD, and addiction. Researchers now have better tools and more rigorous methods, and the stigma is slowly fading. It's almost like LSD is getting a second chance. A chance to prove that it's not just a party drug or a dangerous substance, but a potential key to healing and understanding the mind. At the same time, society's views on drugs are becoming more nuanced. Conversations about decriminalization, harm reduction, and personal freedom are growing louder. People are asking, should we treat drug use as a criminal issue or a public health issue? How can we balance safety with personal autonomy? LSD's story is far from over. Its journey, from accidental discovery to cultural icon to outlaw and now to promising medicine, is a roller coaster full of surprises. So, what comes next? Will LSD reclaim its place in science and society? Can we learn from the past and build a better future with psychedelics? LSD's resurgence in modern mental health research and society. After decades in the shadows, LSD is making a remarkable comeback, not just in pop culture but in cutting-edge science and medicine. The very substance once demonized as a dangerous drug is now being studied as a potential breakthrough treatment for some of the toughest mental health challenges we face today. Modern researchers have started to peel back the layers of LSD's effects on the brain with advanced technology, uncovering how it influences neural pathways, enhances brain connectivity, and even sparks new patterns of thought. Early clinical trials show promising results, especially for conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and addiction, areas where traditional treatments sometimes fall short. One of the most exciting things about LSD therapy is its potential to create profound emotional breakthroughs. Unlike everyday medications that often mask symptoms, LSD-assisted therapy encourages patients to explore deep parts of their psyche, confront trauma, and gain fresh perspectives. This can lead to lasting positive change, not just temporary relief. Of course, it's not magic. These therapies happen in carefully controlled environments with trained professionals guiding the experience. The aim isn't to get high, but to unlock doors in the mind that have been stuck for years. Alongside scientific progress, societal attitudes are shifting. The growing conversation about mental health has created space for alternative treatments. Governments and medical institutions are cautiously warming up to psychedelic research. Some places, like Oregon in the US and parts of Canada, have even started legalizing or decriminalizing psychedelics for therapeutic use. This shift reflects a broader trend toward harm reduction and personal autonomy. Instead of demonizing substances outright, there's more focus on education, safe access, and respecting individuals' choices about their own consciousness. Yet, challenges remain. Stigma from past decades still lingers, and navigating legal and regulatory hurdles isn't easy. Funding for psychedelic research is growing, but remains limited compared to other fields. And as psychedelics gain popularity, it's crucial to avoid hype or reckless use outside of therapeutic settings. But the momentum is undeniable. Researchers, clinicians, and patients alike are optimistic about what LSD and other psychedelics might offer, both as medicines and as tools for self-discovery and spiritual growth. So, the story of LSD comes full circle, from a chance chemical discovery in a Swiss lab to a cultural icon of the 60s through decades of prohibition, and now to a hopeful new chapter in mental health. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes progress means revisiting the past with fresh eyes and an open mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into LSD's fascinating journey. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And if you want us to explore more stories like this, drop your ideas in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep your mind open.